Hello, I'm Bailey Leisure, and this is my 2019 Stanley Cup Finals predictions, as I will be giving my analysis and predictions what I think will happen in the 2019 Stanley Cup Final between the Boston. Representing the Eastern Conference is the Boston Bruins. Yes, another Boston team is in a championship. Big shocker there. But the Bruins, this is their first Cup Finals since 2013, where they lost to the Chicago Blackhawks at home in 6 games and giving up those 2 goals in the last minute. So I think that Cup loss definitely still stings for them. But they're looking for their first Cup since 2011. Like I've said before, Boston's kind of just dominated most of the sports world since 2001. They're looking for their 13th championship since 2001. The Patriots have won 6 Super Bowls. The Red Sox have won 4 World Series. The Bruins won a Stanley Cup back in 2011, and the Celtics, they won the NBA championship in 2008. This is Boston's 20th Stanley Cup final appearance. They're looking for their 7th Stanley Cup. And they're representing the Western Conference is the St. Louis Blues. I mean, this is one of probably the biggest Cinderella stories in recent NHL history. I mean, just what they've done, all the adversity that they've not only had to overcome this season, but just in their history. I mean, just having, when they were an expansion team, they lost, they were in the Stanley Cup Finals in their first couple of years. Obviously they lost all of them. They have an 0-12 Stanley Cup Finals record in games. They never won a Stanley Cup Final game, and obviously the last time they were here back in 1970, nearly 50 years ago, they lost to the Bruins. I think a big highlight was the Bobby Orr goal. So they've never won a Stanley Cup Final game. And you look at the season. They fired their head coach Mike Yeo before they replaced him. They were dead last in the NHL on January 2nd. And if you told us back in January that they would finish at 99 points and win the Western Conference, I don't think anybody would have thought that would happen. But, they just dealt with so much adversity, and, it's just really a surprise. And not only they've dealt adversity in the regular season and in their history, they've been able to deal with it in these playoffs. You look at, the first series, they had a 2-0 series lead going at home against the Winnipeg Jets. They lost, their 2 home games. They were down 2-0 going into the third period against the Jets on the road. They scored 3 goals and come back, and they end up winning that series in 6 games. You look at, the Dallas Stars series. They're down 3 games to 2. They came back and they won in overtime, in double overtime. Pat Maroon. And then we look at, the Western Conference Finals. I think a lot of teams, that call in Game 3 would have destroyed a lot of teams. That just fueled them and just pissed them off, and they overcame that. They stomped the Sharks the next 3 games. I mean, it was just incredible what the Blues have overcome, and just the story that they've brought in the NHL, and especially in these Stanley Cup playoffs. The keys for the Bruins to win the Stanley Cup Final. First one, Tuukka Rask, and Tuukka Rask. Did I say Tuukka Rask? I think I did. But he's led the way for the Bruins. He's put that team on his back, and he's delivered. Like I've said before, it's rare that you see goaltenders really just will teams to Stanley Cups, but he's done it. And I think if they win the Stanley Cup Final, he's definitely going to be the biggest reason why they did it, and he's going to be the Conn Smythe Trophy winner for them. I think another key will be Brad Marchand. Like I've said before, his instigated role has translated into, he's still kind of an instigator, but he's doing, he's scoring goals now, and he's been, he's had an incredible season so far, and I think, I think you can stop goals all you want, but if you can't score, you're not going to win games, and I think that's definitely going to be a huge key for them. And then you look at some of the other players, not only along with Brad Marchand, you got David Krejci, some of their other defensemen or players. I mean, you have Charlie Coyle, their center, Zdeno Chara. He's able to get, he's known for his, his big build and his top defense, but if he gets scoring, that's definitely going to be big. One of the underrated players that I think has done very good for the Bruins has been a former St. Louis Blues, David Backes. It hasn't been the greatest signing for the Bruins. I definitely think his age has been a big thing for them. But he's had a good postseason, and I think he could definitely be a player under the radar that you should look out for when it comes to scoring for the Boston. The keys for the St. Louis Blues to win the Stanley Cup Final, like with Brad Marchand, I think they're the St. Louis Blues' top goal scorer, Jaden Schwartz. I think that's going to be the matchup I look at when it comes to the Stanley Cup Final. Is going to be Marchand versus Jaden Schwartz, who puts up bigger numbers, who puts up more points, and puts up more goals for both teams. I think personally, I think whoever puts up bigger numbers is going to win the Stanley Cup. And I think Jaden Schwartz, like Brad Marchand, he keeps up his scoring pace in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I think another big key, I think, is definitely going to be their power play. It's kind of been on and off in this postseason, but I personally think that's going to be another big key in this series. I mean, it's always is. But I think, the Blues have a lot of players that can be very effective on their power play, but I think that's just going to be kind of an under thing to look at is their power play. And then like with Boston, their goaltender Jordan Binnington, being a rookie goaltender, it just gets harder and harder. Can he live up to the spotlight? For a rookie goaltender, that could be too much for some goaltenders, and especially for a team that I think has a lot more to lose with the Blues in their history. There's a lot more pressure on the Blues to win this than. So my predictions for the 2019 Stanley Cup Final. I mean, you just look at both these teams and you look at the narrative that you have the. Boston's not really the Patriots. The Bruins are not really the Patriots of the National Hockey League, but the Bruins are no underdog. Boston's not really a city of underdogs in this millennium. But, it's kind of like the heavy favorites against the underdog. One of the biggest underdog and Cinderella stories in not only the hockey, but in recent sports history in the Blues. It's kind of a David versus Goliath kind of matchup. I think a lot of people I think outside of Boston would love to see the St. Louis Blues, end their misery, end their hardships. I mean, their history is really a lot of heartbreaks, a lot of disappointments. I've seen, when you look at their history, they've had a lot of great players on their teams, and they've seen them leave and go win cups on, other teams. Not just players, but coaches. I mean, look at, they've had Joe Quenneville, Scotty Bowman's been their head coach in past. Todd Reardon, who's now like head coach for the Washington Capitals. He was an assistant on the Blues, and I think he was a former player as well. But you look at other players, you look at guys like TJ Oshie and Brendan Shanahan and past, Rod Brind'Amour, Chris Pronger, Scott Stevens. The list goes on of how many former players have left their team and gone on to win cups with other teams. And you look at another former Blue that could do it if they beat the Blues in the Stanley Cup Final, David Backes, their former captain. I think this series will be a pretty good series, and hopefully it is for hockey. But I think it just comes down to experience, and I just think Tuukka Rask, he's just playing just on a different level. It kind of reminds me of the Nashville Predators a couple years ago when Pekka Rinne just put the team on his back and got them to the Stanley Cup Final. They ended up losing that final with the Pittsburgh Penguins, who won back-to-back cups. But I think it just comes down to experience, and I think just the big thing I'm going to look at is goaltending. Jordan Binnington versus Tuukka Rask. I think Tuukka Rask, he's ready for the spotlight. He's ready to make a legend for himself, get out of the shadows of Tim Thomas, and I think he'll do that. And I think he'll lead the Bruins to a Stanley Cup win in 6 games. I think the Blues will win at least a game or 2 in the Stanley Cup Finals. But I think the Bruins will win in 6 games, and the Conn Smythe Trophy winner will obviously be Tuukka Rask. What are your predictions for the 2019 Stanley Cup Final? Who do you think will win? Who do you think will be the big impactful players? Just leave it in the comment section below. As always, follow me on Twitter at BayLaser96 as I just passed 100 followers. So, I thank everybody that has followed me on Twitter from these videos. Click like if you liked the video, and as always, subscribe if you like the content on my channel. So, thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you all later.